Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am bringing you my July wrap-up. I read a lot more than I thought I did in July. I ended up reading 14 books. I apparently just at the end of the month just destroyed a ton of books and just absolutely tore through them. So yeah, it was a really good reading month. I enjoyed the majority of what I read, but there are a few books that I didn't end up loving. And because there are 14 books here, I'm just gonna go ahead and dive right in. I am going to direct you to reviews where I have them, and I'm also going to link all of the books in the description down below if you would like to learn a little bit more about them. Alright, starting off with a book that I actually did not love and was really disappointed with. The very first book that I read in the month of July was The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. I have a full review of this book on my channel. I'll go ahead and link it up above. But long story short, this book was a huge disappointment from an author that I really love. So this book follows a group of women who are basically the final girls from horror films, the last person standing. It's kind of like the big trope in the horror genre. And basically it's them like 20 years on trying to live their lives, but someone is going around trying to kill them. I didn't like this. I did not think it was very good, and I did not think it was up to its usual standard. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. Another book that I thought that I would love, but I actually didn't, I thought it was just okay, was Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Q. Tsunado. So this is a contemporary book, it's a rom-com, and I don't think I've ever actually read a rom-com before. I usually like watch them, and I think that might be where some of this book was a little bit for me. So basically we follow a young woman named Medi, and Medi is very much the obedient sort of first generation daughter for a Chinese family, and she ends up kind of being strong-armed into going on this date with this guy, and she ends up accidentally killing him. So her mother calls in her aunties to help hide the body, and shenanigans ensue. I think where this book was kind of for me is the fact that maybe it was, I was reading this character's internal dialogue rather than like seeing her on a screen. I feel like if I was watching the film of this book, I would have enjoyed it a lot more because I thought that Medi just wasn't a very strong character. I think that taking a character like her, especially knowing a lot of these young women having grown up in a community where there were lots of Asian American kids who I grew up with and went to school with, I know this woman. And I feel like there would have been so many opportunities to make her a much more interesting character, and taking that kind of the sort of like obedience, the cultural obedience to her family, and sort of like sort of pushing down what she wants to do in order to make her mother and her aunties happy could have been really interesting. But I think she was just kind of a weak character, which is a shame because it was a first person perspective, so we were in her head the whole time. However, what I loved about this book were, of course, the aunties, who are just absolutely amazing. I loved every second that they were on the page. They just weren't on the page enough for me. I didn't really like Medi. I didn't really like her love interest. I didn't really like the kind of romance. There were some really amazing funny bits, but overall it was fine. It was just okay. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. After that, I went for some nonfiction, so I read Pandora's Jar by Natalie Haynes. This is basically a book about women in Greek mythology, from, you know, tragic romances to villainous women. It breaks down kind of the stories of 10 different women in Greek mythology and sort of how they've been shafted by the men who have been writing them. And one of the things that I think is really interesting that she does with this book is she, for example, with Jocasta, who's the mother of Oedipus, who marries his mother and kills his father, she goes into what this woman realistically would have been thinking, what kind of maybe some of the original intentions may have been with these characters, and it talks about sort of why these women may have been written the way that they were, and she basically defends these women. So we have Medusa, we have Jocasta, as I said, we have Helen of Troy, we have Eurydice, of Orfeo and Eurydice, and it's just really, really good. These are quite short because there are 10 women that she talks about, and this book is less than 300 pages long, so there's about like 20 to 30 pages dedicated to each woman, but it really provides an excellent launching off point for someone like me who was obsessed with Greek mythology when I was little, but the really sanitized versions of Greek myths. There's a lot more sinister things happening than little Justine's brain thought. So this is a great place to start if you want to kind of learn about Greek mythology or sort of re-examine Greek mythology as an adult. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I definitely recommend it. Then I read what I think might be one of my favorite books of the year. This is This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron. This is the author of Cinderella is Dead, which was a big book last year, which I have on the shelf and I have not read yet. But this is another standalone book from this author, and it was fabulous. So this book follows a character named Bree, and she and her 2 mums live in Brooklyn and run a flower shop. And Bree has a little bit of a special gift. She has an affinity for plants. She can make plants grow and plants kind of react to her emotions. And she's always lived sort of in fear of people finding out about this power. Her parents know, but no one else really does. So one day she ends up learning that actually a mysterious aunt that she has never met has left her this house up in upstate New York, in this small town, and she and her parents decide to go up to check it out, and mysterious things ensue. I loved this book. I really, really, truly loved it. There's like peril and like bad things happen and there's adventure and stuff, but it's wholesome. It's really heartwarming. I love the relationship between Bree and her parents. I loved the fact that they know about this power and that they kind of encourage her to, once they're out in the countryside and sort of a little bit more isolated, they encourage her to kind of like, you know, stretch and press the limits of what maybe she can do. I loved how supportive the whole family was. I loved that relationship so, so much, which I feel in... I'm no expert on contemporary YA, but I feel like that's maybe not something that you see as often with sort of a teenage protagonist and their parents. So that was really wonderful. I love the romance in this. There's kind of a little blossoming sapphic romance that happens in this book, and it was so good. As a kind of self-proclaimed plant witch, I absolutely adored this book. I loved it so much. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I could not recommend it more highly. Taking a sharp left turn from wholesome, lovely plant magic, we have Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. This is a book that comes out in October from Tor.com, and it is just as spooky as this cover indicates. In this book, we follow a group of friends is kind of a stretch because there's some tensions in this group, but a group of acquaintances are sort of seeking out wedding venues. So they go to this kind of abandoned mansion in Japan that has its own spooky kind of backstory. And as they spend the night, they're drinking, they're eating, they're having a great time, really creepy and horrific things begin to happen. I really enjoyed this. I think that this is a really, really interesting kind of more literary writing style, and I love the influence of Japanese folklore and just how creepy this book was. It's definitely one to read with the lights on, I will say, and it is, you know, a short book, but it is just as long as it needs to be. The author does a really fantastic job of using every single page to her advantage, and one of the things that I personally really love in like horror media, so whether it's books or films or whatever, is that building of tension and sort of people beginning to kind of go at each other. So like, for example, my favorite horror movie is The Thing, because of all that tension of like, who's real and who's not, and everyone starts getting freaked out and stuff. This book does that really, really well, so I thought this was a really fantastic read. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Then we have one of my most anticipated books of the year. It took me a while to finish this one up because I was listening to the audiobook, which is really, really good, would recommend, but I kind of went into a bit of an audiobook slump, so I just ended up picking up my beautiful Illumicrate edition. This is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This book draws a lot of influence from Indian history and Indian epics, and it is fairly complicated, but it's basically about two women who join forces to remove the emperor from power. The first woman is Milani, and she is the emperor's sister. She has been held captive and is being drugged because she has disobeyed her brother in this huge public way. And the other woman is Priya, who is a maidservant who, sort of in a former life, as a child, she had access to this incredible, powerful magic of her people. So this is fabulous, as any Tasha Suri book would be. The world building is incredible, and the politics kind of take a big step up from some of the other books that she has written. So in the books of Amba, politics are a big part of it, but like this gets much more complex. There's backstabbing, there's the kind of conversations around colonialism, and it's really fabulous and well done. So if you like those kind of intricate political books, this is definitely a good shout. Her characters are fabulous as always. Priya and Milani are so incredibly complex gray area characters, and they are so interesting to read about, especially kind of the differences between the two of them, because obviously they're on very different sides of everything: politics, society, social class, all of that. But the way that they sort of learn to interact and the way that they sort of dance around each other is really excellent. And there's another character that I love named Bhumika, who is someone who's going to stick with me for a very long time, because she is someone who takes a kind of different route from a lot of fantasy characters that I personally have read about. She takes a great personal cost in order to protect the ones that she loves, and she's just an incredible character. I adore her so much. And the romance, as you would expect, again from one of her books, is so good. It's a beautiful slow burn sapphic romance, and like, I was just living for every second of it. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was fabulous. Totally expected. It was great. We are deviating slightly from the order that I read things in, but it makes sense to talk about these all at once. I'm actually going to do a dedicated video on these books, so I'm not going to talk about them a huge amount here. I read 3 of Junji Ito's books for the very first time. I have heard people talking about him for ages, and I had heard that I would really like his stuff, and so I ended up finding a bunch of his stuff in a buy 2 for 3 sale thingy in Forbidden Planet. I think I talked about that in my London book haul video, but I read all 3 of these this month. So I have Tomi, which is about a girl who is kind of this incredible seductress, and she drives men to murder. Her specifically, she keeps coming back and back. This was great. I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. And I read Smashed, which is a collection of 13 stories. This one, I think I rated 3 initially, but a lot of these stuck with me in a big way. So I ended up bumping this up to 4. This is really interesting. I really like the way that some of these are, they really make you think, and that's all I'll say. And then I read Ramina, which I actually really didn't like. This is his sci-fi horror one. This was really weak. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. If you want to see more about those books, I am going to be posting up a video about them in the next week or so. Right, so after that I read Light Chaser by Peter F. Hamilton and Gareth L. Powell. This is a novella that is coming out in August or September, I think it's August, from Tor.com. I have read Gareth Powell's stuff before. I really enjoy his writing. I've never read anything by Peter F. Hamilton before. This is an interesting one because I feel like I loved a lot of it, but it was a story that really couldn't be contained in a novella format because there was a huge piece missing. It's really hard to explain this one without spoilers, but I'm gonna do my best. In Light Chaser, we follow a woman named Amal who is basically a centuries or millennia old woman who basically has this loop around the galaxy, around the solar systems to collect memories. And she's kind of become this incredible, like, mythical figure in these societies because some of them are spacefaring, some of them are very medieval, and she goes about her business until one day she finds out that something is very wrong and she decides she is going to do something about it. I love the concept of the story. I absolutely adored her as a character, and kind of like the snark that comes with sort of knowing you're just basically an ordinary person who's much more technologically advanced, but she's just doing a job, but she kind of becomes, she becomes this figure of myth and legend, and she's woven into sort of like the lore of these various societies. I thought that was great. I really loved that. And I really loved sort of like the basic concept of this book. But I think when we get, I'm gonna try not to be too spoilery here. When we get to the thing, the big bad thing that's happening, I feel like for me that's where this book fell apart a little bit, because she puts a lot of trust in her information that I think is very unrealistic. And for me, everything sort of fell apart from there. I know that's super vague. If you read this, maybe you'll understand, maybe you'll get where I'm coming from. I would love to talk about this book with anyone who has read it, but I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars because, again, I loved so much of it, but it just kind of fell apart at a certain point. I have been trying to read more translated books, so when I saw Kim Ji-young, born 1982, by Cho Nam-ju in my bookstore, I decided to pick it up. I really didn't have any idea what this was about, and it totally blew me away. I loved this. This is a book that doesn't really have a lot of plot. It basically follows this character, Kim Ji-young, as she is growing up from her childhood through until she is a wife and mother, and it's basically using her life as a commentary on misogyny in Korea and the wider world. Let's be realistic, there's a lot in here that can relate to life in the West, and it is a rage-inducing and fiercely feminist book. It is so good, and I dare any woman who reads this to not relate to at least some part of this. And the ending of this is one of the best endings I've ever read because it is so rage-inducing. The fire and the flames, and just, oh my god, it was so good. This is like one of the most impactful and powerful books that I have read ever. This might be a new favorite. Oh my god. Please read this. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So the next book was kind of picked up on a whim. I have started sewing a lot. As you may know if you follow me on Instagram. I have been sewing a lot, and I needed an audiobook for some fabric cutting and pattern cutting, so I ended up picking up The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher. I listened to this on Scribd, and it was so good. So this is a horror book that follows a woman named Mouse, and she has been asked by her father to clean out her nasty dead grandmother's house. Her grandmother's a nasty person, but also the house is kind of nasty because her grandmother was a hoarder. So she ends up, as she's cleaning out this house in total misery, sarcastic misery, she ends up discovering a journal from her step-grandfather talking about something called the Twisted Ones. And then very creepy things begin to happen. There are figures emerging from the woods. There are things looking in on her as she sleeps, and she ends up getting kind of caught up in this supernatural horror. This was really good. I really enjoyed this. This is one where the audiobook was excellent because the character has such a strong voice. This is a very voicey book because she is so incredibly sarcastic and funny. It works really well on audiobook, so I would really recommend this on audio if you're looking for something for your sort of fall and October TBR. But I just thought this was so well done. She has a really fantastic way of hyping up the tension and the creep factor. Some of the stuff in this was really creepy, and let me tell you, I am really glad I live in a second floor flat, because if I was on the ground floor, the blinds would be drawn forever. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. I think that, and it actually talks about this in the book, which is kind of funny. I don't think it was intended to be this way, but I think that when a horror book kind of reveals what the horror thing is, it kind of gets a little bit less scary, which is quite funny because she mentions that in the book. But yeah, I think that once we found out what was actually going on, some of that tension really left the book for me. And the ending was like fine, it was good, but I think that the best part of this is sort of the lead up to that moment. This next book is one that I picked up from the library, and I was really curious about it because I've seen it everywhere, but it was one of those books where you can read it in like 20 minutes, so I never wanted to buy it, but I saw it faced out in my library, and I decided to pick it up. This is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Maxey. This was not my thing. This was so not for me. I am not the right reader for this, so if you're thinking of picking this up, I would highly recommend maybe picking it up from the library or something, because I can see this being a great book for other people, but y'all, I am way too cynical for this. This is just not for me. So basically, this is a little... It almost feels kind of like Winnie the Pooh in the sort of illustrations and stuff, so like, check, that's very Winnie the Pooh right there. But it's basically like a short little compilation of like life-affirming quotes with illustrations, and the illustrations are stunning. Like, I love this. I don't know if you can see that, but particularly the color illustrations, beautiful. But like, let me give you an example of sort of the life-affirming quotes that are in here. "Doing nothing with friends is never doing nothing, is it?" asked the boy. "No," said the mole. "Sometimes," said the horse. "Sometimes what?" asked the boy. "Sometimes just getting up and carrying on is brave and magnificent." "Sometimes I feel lost," said the boy. "Me too," said the mole. "But we love you, and love brings you home." This is so not for me. I'm sorry, this is the live, laugh, love of books, and it's so not my jam. Yeah. I think, in addition to the fact that this just not being my thing, I can't read the fucking writing in this book. Look at this. They must have turned his handwriting into a font. I cannot read this. And one of my like first office jobs involved deciphering handwriting that was basically impossible. I am good at this. I could not read this. What the hell? So this was 2 out of 5 stars. Beautiful illustrations, but like, that's not for me. And last but absolutely not least, we have Heartstopper Volume 4 by Alice Oseman. This is a very, very sweet contemporary graphic novel about 2 boys who fall in love. This one, I feel, went a little bit darker. We are kind of like at the point where they're in an established relationship, spoiler alert, and we get into some kind of like mental health stuff, and I thought that where she took this story and into those kinds of darker themes was fabulous. I think that especially for teenagers who are reading this, this will be like game-changing for some people. I thought this was so good. I just, Nick and Charlie are just the cutest. They're just the sweetest little beans, and I love them so much. I love the sort of extended cast of characters, their friend group and everything. It's just, you ever want a warm hug? If you ever want to break from all the grimdark stuff, if you're anything like me and you want a warm hug, you should read these because they're just lovely. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. The other ones I gave 4, so this one I think definitely stepped things up. And really quickly, I just wanted to issue a content warning for eating disorders in this one because we do dive into that a bit. So that is it for my July wrap-up. My leg is asleep and it's really, really uncomfortable, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up now. But this was a really good reading month for me, despite some of the disappointments, some of the ridiculousness, the live, laugh, love books that I read. But overall, it was a great reading month and I have very high hopes for August. I would love to hear in the comments below if you have read any of these books, if you liked them, didn't like them, had different thoughts from me. I would love to chat. Also, I would love to hear what you read in the month of July. I'm really distracted by my leg. I'm really uncomfortable. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.